Hey lads, today we are going to the ASU Spring Championship. The weather here in Arizona is absolutely beautiful. It is a 45-minute plus, I believe 10 seconds a move, 4-round tournament. I'm going to be playing in the 14 to 1600 section, I believe. Big turnout for this tournament. A lot of people will be at it, and I'm excited to see how we do.
Every person that I played in this tournament was somebody that I've already played at a previous tournament. So I kind of had a little bit of an idea what my opponents were going to be doing. My first opponent was a young man named Sai. I played against him previously, I think it was January ASU, and I beat him. He had the white pieces in that game, and I had the black pieces. And again, in this game, I had the black pieces. So this was a rematch. The first one was a very, very close game. I managed to get an edge in the middle, and then I blundered a minor piece in the end game, and it came down to just rooks and pawns, and I was able to bully him with the clock. But in this game, it didn't happen quite like that. So a wee bit different, and a different variation of the Caro Kann as well. He played e4, c6, d4, d5, and here's where the variation changed. He pushed. And I believe in the previous one, he took my pawn, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be. I played c5, knight came out, bishop came out, and then he defended his pawn on d4. And here, I believe I already have an advantage. And really the move that I need to be playing is c captures d4, and here the knight can't capture because I'll take the queen, so bishop is most likely going to capture, and this just leaves him with a very awkward pawn on e5 that I can very quickly attack. I can get my pawn up to e6, and I can even maneuver my knight to g6, hitting the pawn here. So two pieces attacking, and it's going to be very awkward for him to have to deal with this. He can't move this piece and then get a pawn here to support this pawn. So he's really going to just be trying to probably defend this pawn with pieces, which is not ideal. And it's very easy for me to get pieces here to just attack it. This is what I should have gone for, but I didn't. Instead, what I decided to do was just develop my knight to c6. This is a very typical move that I always do in the Caro Kann. It's not a bad move, but I did have a way to get a slight edge. Here he played c3, capture, and e6. This position I've reached a billion times in my online games. I was feeling very comfortable. Here he played bishop e2, and this move is a wee bit annoying because now this knight is not pinned, and so it's defending the pawn again. So now he has two defenders of this pawn. So if I was to bring my knight around here and go after this pawn, I would only have two pieces attacking the pawn, and I'd have to add a third. Yes, I could be able to take this, but he's probably bringing his other knight to d2. So because of this, I was thinking maybe we'd throw in a queen check, and maybe he won't go to d2. He might come to c3, and then he won't be able to recapture here and have his defender staying. That went through my mind, but I didn't know if he was going to block one way or the other. And then I thought, well, he could block with the bishop, and then I take here, he takes here, and then I capture the pawn for free because the bishop's not defending the pawn anymore. But then I thought, this doesn't work because my queen's sitting here, you know? So I thought maybe I'd have to bring the other bishop in first, and it was just getting a wee bit confusing, and I didn't quite see, especially if his bishop took and then his queen's hitting my knight again, and yeah, I could recapture and I'd be defending my knight, but it all just seemed a bit confusing, so I didn't want to go for that. So here I played the move, captures on f3, and I don't think I really should have done this. I think it's better to wait for the knight to have moved here and wasted a tempo. Instead, I just allowed his bishop to get to a slightly better square, potentially. I mean, it's not so good that it's not on this diagonal, but I don't think this hurts him, and also maybe he would have wasted a tempo playing h3, trying to kick me, so I should probably wait for those things. Here he took. I brought my knight out. He played queen b6. I'm sorry, queen b3. a good move, I thought, because my goal was to play queen b6, hit the pawn, and hit the pawn on b2. So I had to put my queen on a much more passive square, and I didn't really feel like this was so great for me. Now, the best move in this position is actually a knight f5. Just continue with attacking this. There's only one defender right now, and so here he needs to defend this piece, and it's not so obvious how he's going to do that. It says here queen coming to b5 is the best, just pinning one of the defenders so that the other defender, the bishop, could retake, and I can't recapture because he'd be hitting my king. But I thought maybe here, you know, this might be totally fine for me. However, I didn't get too deep into that way of thinking, and I really should have, because this is where my advantage is. And playing the queen to c7 is just pretty lame. I mean, there's no other real word for it. It's just a lame sort of move. I don't like it. I should have just continued with my plan, bringing my knight to f5. Here my opponent castled. I finally go with my plan, knight to f5. He swings his rook over now, and think about this, like, he wouldn't have been able to play this if I had just gone with this immediately. You know, he'd be forced here, and the queen's having to run away. So, is what it is. Bishop comes out, knight blocks the bishop, and here I castle. I thought I should just castle. I never castle in my games. I need to just get into a habit of doing this. It's one of the best moves. So I'm glad that I took the time to just do that. Here he swings his rook over to c1, and all of a sudden some scary stuff starts to happen. I really was trying to figure out, how do I win this pawn? I have two attackers, but he has two defenders. So right now I need to just add another attacker. So I thought, well, the obvious one is queen to b6, and then I'd have three attackers. But I really didn't like the look of queen to b6 because I saw that he had knight to a4. Now, apparently this doesn't work, and I should have just gone with it. Knight takes c4. If he takes my queen, well, then I take his queen hitting his rook. A takes b3, and here we don't have to worry about this. We could just take his bishop, hitting his rook. Now, he could take my rook. That's fine if he wants to do that, or he could take here. If he takes here, I capture here, and I'm just up a pawn, and we both have bad structures. So I'm doing totally fine. This could have been something I went for. A bit long to calculate, but like very easy to calculate that kind of stuff because all the moves are fairly forced. It could have also ended where he takes on a8 instead, and I would have to take on c1. And then if he tries to run this guy, well, then I can just come here and hit this guy. And yes, he could capture me and defend, but I have bishop a5 here, and he can't move this piece because as soon as he does, I win the rook with back ranking too. So this would have been totally fine for me. Unfortunately, I didn't go for any of this. I played the pawn to a6, which you can kind of see the logic behind, but it's not a great move. The idea is I'm playing a6 so that I can then play b5. a6 protects b5, and the knight can't jump to a4 if there's a pawn on b5. And if the knight can't jump to a4, then the queen can happily come to b6 and attack the pawn. A very convoluted way of going about winning a single pawn. However, my opponent had a tactic here. Thankfully, he missed it, but he could have played the beautiful knight captures on d5, hitting my queen. And here, I feel like I have to move my queen or take the knight. I mean, those are really my only options. The engine's best move is e captures d5, but now you can see the rook is pinning this knight to the queen, and so this piece really isn't defended. He could capture, and here, yes, I can capture the queen, but then he can capture my queen with a powerful rook hitting on b7, and he's already won a pawn. So this would have been very nice for him. Instead of capturing this pawn with his knight, my opponent played the queen back to c2, which misses this whole tactic, but opens up a slightly different tactic. Right now, he's attacking my knight. My knight's only defended by the pawn. And so one way that he can remove the defender of this pawn is by capturing this pawn himself. So if I recapture his knight, then he wins my knight here on f5. And I kind of missed this idea. I saw it and sort of. I'm being completely honest when I say I sort of saw it. I did sort of see this. I was like, oh, my knight looks a bit weak there. But then I missed the knight capturing and it sort of slipped my mind and I went into calculation for something different. I thought maybe he's going to be trying to maneuver this knight. Maybe his knight's going to come here. And then all of a sudden he's got two pieces looking at this knight. I didn't like the look of that. I had seen the queen here earlier hitting this bishop and thinking, oh, if he takes my knight, then he's going to win the bishop. And so I was very happy when I saw this move, but this tactic I really should have considered a wee bit longer just so I could fully understand his idea. If you don't ever understand why an opponent makes a move, you really need to consider a wee bit more until you fully understand like what he's doing. I think that's a very helpful thing in chess that I need to do more. Just fully understand your opponent's move. Why did he do it? And then you can proceed to make plans. Here I swung my rook over to c8 and he captured the pawn. I thought for a while here, do I try to move my queen? The best move recommended by the engine is queen a5. The second best move recommended by the engine is queen b8. But I went for the third best move, which was knight takes bishop. I'm attacking his queen and he's attacking my queen. So here, if capture, capture. And now his knight is stuck and my knight's stuck. So what would happen here? Well, maybe bishop captures here. Now there's two different pieces that I could capture. I would probably capture this one because this one is not as important to me. I have all my pawns on light squares and I really just hate knights. And here, if he captures here, I'd recapture and I'd be totally fine. So capture, capture. And I think this position is very good for me because I'm basically up a piece. The best move in this position for white is bringing his bishop back to e4, two attackers on the knight. The knight can't move because then I lose the rook, even if the knight could go to a safe square, which currently it doesn't look like it even can. So then I would have to play rook to c8, two pieces defending, two pieces attacking, and he can't add this one to attack because there's a bishop here. So technically I'm up a piece, down a pawn, but and I'm completely winning, but my knight is very awkward and it's going to be a wee bit tricky maybe trying to get it out. Here the best move is g3 and then bishop a5, making room for the knight. But then maybe this move, and it's still looking a wee bit awkward. How do I get it out? Bishop b6 is apparently the move here. Attacking this one and maybe going after this one and h4 and then h5, king h1. Who would ever play that? Maybe I can get out. Looks like I can get out. Again, none of this happened. Here he took the pawn. I took the bishop. And instead of taking my queen, which I was really hoping he would do because it just leads to me winning the game, he took my knight. And here I was not feeling great. My position's kind of bad. I decided to move my pieces so that they can coordinate and attack the weak pawn still. My game plan is extremely simple in the Caro Kann. Pile up on the pawn. Just get it. That's all you got to do. Generally, it will work if you play it correctly, but this game is proving very difficult. Here he takes off one of my defenders of that pawn. I recapture and tempo his queen. His queen's got to move. He comes over here to defend the pawn. Two pieces defending, and now I only have one attacking. So I take off one of his defenders by drawing his one defender onto this square. And now we both have one defender. So I add an attacker. Now I have two attackers. I want to win this pawn. He just swings back, two defenders. So he's winning it. He's holding on to it. He's doing very well here. Here I swing my bishop down to e7. thinking maybe I can play f6, take, and have 3 attackers. This seemed like a good way to sort of try to do that. Here he plays the move b3 because this was also a discovered attack with my queen when the bishop moved. I'm now hitting this one. I play f6, going for my plan. Bishop comes to f6. I have 3 attackers. How is he going to defend this pawn? How would you defend this pawn? I was hoping that he would play the move knight to c2. And this doesn't work. And I knew it didn't work because I calculated it. Here I would capture. If he recaptures, I mean, he could capture with queen. If he captures with queen, I just win his queen. So he's going to recapture with knight. And then here I would play e5. e5 attacks the pinned piece. The piece cannot move because I win his queen. And so here his best move is queen c4, which is just a check. I run away. And now he's defending with his rook. But this isn't great for him because I can come here and I'm still defending with 2 other pieces when I take, and he'd only be attacking with 2 pieces. So here his best move was rook e1, and here I could capture here. And he can't back rank me. He doesn't have pieces lined up on this square, so I would be totally fine here. I'd have a pawn that is passed, and I'm not winning because we have equal pawns. He's got 5, I've got 5, and although my pawn is passed and looks like it could promote, I would have thought this game seems pretty even. Like, it's probably going to a draw. However, my opponent did not play the knight back to defend, which I was a wee bit unhappy about. He played the best move, pawn to d5. And here I had a very long think. I ended up coming up with the move bishop to g5, trying to eliminate one of the defenders of the pawn. Now, I wasn't worried about this pawn capturing on e6 because I would win his queen. The pawn is technically pinned. But I was a wee bit worried about him pushing the pawn. So I played bishop g5. And here my opponent played knight to c4, attacking my queen. All his moves were very logical. And knight c4 also sets up the pawn coming to d6. I was getting a wee bit more nervous the further that pawn inched up the board. I played queen to c5. Here he played queen to e4, defending the pawn and attacking my pawn. And now I'm starting to get a wee bit worried because it looks like there's a lot more threats. You know, he's going to win a pawn here. It just looked scary. And I didn't seem to be able to hold on to everything I wanted to hold on to. I knew that he couldn't capture my pawn here because I would win with checkmate on the back rank. Queen has to block and we take the queen with checkmate. But here, the queen coming in with a check looks really deadly. I did not want to allow this. And so in this position, I just decided I'm going to eliminate the pawn. I don't want it coming any closer. I'm just going to take it off. Now, the best move in this position was actually queen to c6, which is a pretty disgusting move. You have to say, like, that's just beautiful. The pawn can't capture because, again, this is a checkmate. And it is also attacking the pawn and pinning the pawn. So the pawn cannot capture the queen. And also, the queen cannot capture on e6 because the queen on c6 would capture the queen on e6, and he can't capture me still because of the back rank checkmate. So this would have been a really nice move to find. However, I didn't find it. I just captured the pawn. He checked. I moved my king over, and here he played his knight to e5. Now, I wasn't too worried in this position. I thought in this position, after he checked, he really should have come queen to f5, and this is what I thought he was going to do. In this position, I was going to play bishop f6, and then he has knight e3, defending his queen, attacking the pawn 3 times, and I'm probably going to lose this pawn soon. Also, he's attacking this pawn on h7, so I really need to defend that. My best move here is queen c8, but then he can just capture here. And so he's up another pawn. This one is very weak, and again, I'm not doing well. So he could have gone for all this, but he played the move instead, knight to e5, and the position is basically back to even here. Now, I saw immediately he has queen f7 checkmate. But then I saw if I try to just defend this checkmate by coming here to c7, then I'm going to lose this pawn. At least that's what I thought. So if I had come back to c7, then I thought, can he just capture here? Well, no, he can't because of c1 mate. So I shouldn't have been worried about that. Can he capture here? No, he can't because I capture his queen. And if he recaptures here, well, this is a checkmate. So I really didn't need to be worried about defending this pawn at all, but I was worried about it. And so instead of coming back to c7, the best move by the engine is queen e7. The position is completely equal. But instead of coming back to c7 or e7, I played the move queen d6. And this was going to force a trade, I thought. And then I just completely forgot that there was a mate in 1. And I don't know how I do this. But I lost the game. Sai absolutely destroyed me. We are now 1-1. So I am excited to meet him again over the board. And finally get a game with white, hopefully. So that I can take him out downtown and spank him. We had a long chat after the game about this. It was a really fun game. And it was enjoyable getting to discuss it with him. But let's jump into game 2, which has some of the most insane endgame study stuff that you're going to ever want to see in an over-the-board game. I think you'll find it extremely interesting. Real quick, Sai played in this game with an 80.8% accuracy, and I played with a 73. Let's jump into game 2. In game 2, we played against James. James's rating was 1423. And I had previously played him when I was white, and he had played the Dutch defense. And so that's what I was expecting in this game. And that's what we got. I played d4, he played e6, I played knight c3, he played f5. And this is already a mistake because I can play the move e4 and he doesn't have a knight on f6. So against knight c3, you have to remember to play your own knight to c3 to just defend this e4 square so that you can capture on this square comfortably. My opponent pinned my knight to the king. Here I captured on f5. He took my knight. I captured the bishop on c3 and he recaptured on f5. Yes, this pawn structure looks a wee bit weird, but I have more development and his king is still in the center. So I was feeling very comfortable here. I keep using that word and I really struggle at saying that word, comfortably. I played knight f3 and I really took a long time deciding on this. I think I spent like 3 or 4 minutes, which is a long time for me. I couldn't come up with the best plan here. I'm supposed to just play bishop to d3, forcing a reaction from my opponent. You know, he needs to defend this pawn. If he does try to defend it, I mean, engine says his best move is knight f6, but d6 here was what I was expecting. This defends the pawn. So yeah, I really need to just be in more of a habit of playing the most forcing moves, forcing reactions instead of allowing him to come up with his own plan. I think that would be something that I need to take from this game. However, yeah, I played knight to f3. Here he developed his knight to f6, and I took another probably 5 minutes really thinking about this move. I put the bishop on a3 because I wanted to stop the king from castling. I was trying to be forcing. Here, the best move is queen e2, which is a slightly more forcing move, checking the king. And yeah, queen comes here, we could trade queens, and his king stays in the middle. That would have probably been a way easier way to keep the king in the middle. If queen here and knight to e4, well, then we have bishop g5. And this is just winning the queen on the spot. So he can't really do this. He can't capture because he's pinned. And so here he has to take with his queen. Or, you know, just play something else and I'm going to just capture. So this would have been really nice. But I didn't play the most forcing moves. So I need to just be in more of a habit of doing that. Bishop a3 was still okay though. They played d6, which I expected. and I immediately played bishop c4, still stopping my opponent from castling. I did not want him to castle and try to get his king tucked away in safety. Here he checked me. Now, the best move here is maybe a slightly tricky one for you to find. And I'm saying that and now you're all looking for it and you've already found it. Knight e5, because the pawn is pinned. That would have been a cool move to play, but I didn't play that. I instead moved the king over to f1. I could have played queen e2 and then bring my bishop back, but that allows him to castle, and I didn't want to just let him get castled with my bishop not developed. I felt like it was a bit boring and lame. So I decided to just put my king on f1, deal with my rook being bad, who cares, and try to play as aggressive as I could with these bishops. That's what I wanted to go for. Here he jumps his knight in, attacking my pawn on c3, and I have to defend that pawn. So I move the queen up to defend it. Here he plays bishop to e6, and I have another long think. Now, I know I keep saying that I have long thinks, and you're probably all thinking, Owen gets into time trouble this game. I don't get into time trouble. I was just letting you know that sometimes I do have a long sort of think about certain moves. This move was really tricky for me to figure out what to do. I was really considering pawn to d5. Pawn to d5, he can't take. He's going to be forced to move his bishop. But I didn't know if I wanted an undefended pawn on d5. I mean, it is defended by the bishop, but it also blocks my bishop's scope. It can't stop the king from castling. And also, it can't be defended by another pawn. So I didn't really end up wanting to do this. So I did the second best move, which was bishop takes bishop. He recaptured with the queen. And here I played queen b5 check. Apparently, this is really bad because of knight d7, which is the move he played, and which was the move I was expecting. But I saw this, I saw check, and we're hitting this pawn here. If he comes here, I felt very good about this because I'm hitting his rook and I'm hitting his knight. Apparently, queen c4 check, king over, and rook b8, you know, and then the rook's coming down and everything's getting a bit ugly. The queen is also defending the knight, so apparently it's not good for me. Anyway, I didn't calculate that. I also thought after checking here, he probably doesn't want to play c6. C6 didn't seem so good because I can take on b7 and win the rook. If he did play c6, I could have just captured, and then his best move here is to castle, and yeah, I can capture here, but then he has queen c4 check and king g1, and then queen e2 and coming in here, and this is a mate threat, and I'm very nervous, so I'm going to have to block here, and then queen a6 hits my bishop, and stuff is a bit nuts. It's a very equal game, but he's probably trapping my queen. He's blocking both of these squares with his queen, and he's going to get his knight over here. So that looks like that's what's going to happen. That's why the game's so even. My opponent played the move knight d7, and I took the pawn stupidly. Now, you all know the move for black here. It would be queen to c4 check, but my opponent played the king up to e7, which was what I was actually expecting. I was expecting him to castle or to play the king up, and I just wasn't looking at any of his checks, and that's my bad, and that's something I need to be more observant to in the future. Here, I played knight e5. I thought this was a pretty cool move because the pawn is pinned, and so the knight is attacking this knight. If he just captures here, I can recapture with the pawn, and then his queen recaptures, and then I'm taking this pawn, and it just looked like his whole center was sort of going to just crumble into bits, you know? So the way it goes is he captured, I captured, and he threw in the c4 check, which now is not a good move. I went king g1, and here he took my pawn on c3. It's kind of funny if you see these reviews, like you see every time one of the colors, white or black, captures a pawn, it's like all of a sudden a really bad move. And that's because when you capture a piece, you're not really developing, or I mean, maybe you are occasionally, but like a lot of the time you're moving a piece that's already developed. So here, the knight's really well placed here. So it's probably better, like if we go back here, a king e6, like he wants to develop his king to a better square, get it out of this pin. That's one move. His other move is rook h to c8, defending the pawn. That would have been a way to develop this piece and put it into the game, not just capturing free material. So another helpful tip is just stop capturing free material. I mean, that's what I did here with grabbing this pawn with a queen that was already developed. Why don't I instead just get my, you know, king into a safe square and get my pieces into the game? That would be much better generally. Anyway, here he takes the pawn. I capture with check. He can't capture here because he's pinned, and he can't capture here because it's defended. And so I thought if king comes to d7, I can take here and the pieces are all coming off and I'm just up a few pawns. If the king goes to the back rank, I win the rook for free, and the other rook when the king moves back onto this 7th rank. And so then I thought if king comes to the e6 square, rook e1 to check him. And I thought this move, king f6, was his best square. And I didn't like the look of that. Apparently his best square is king f7, and I would have still traded here. Queen takes, and I have a pawn, but the king's quite far from it. But I didn't quite know what I was going to do against this move. I was considering a bishop b2. I don't know if that's very good. No, it's not. So the best move is g3 or h3 or queen f3. So those are all the things I should... And apparently this is not so good either. Again, capturing material is not good. My opponent played the move king to d7. And I was quite happy to see this because I knew that I could just trade down to an endgame. So that's what I went for. Take, take, take. And here I thought my opponent really needs to defend this pawn. I would have, if I was him, probably gone rook h g8, defending this pawn. Now this isn't a good move. I don't know why it's not a good move, but when I go here, his knight's going to move and I can't win this pawn back. But apparently, I keep saying that word, apparently, I can defend my own pawn. So I suppose he wanted to just capture this so I didn't ever have to be able to defend it. The other move that is his other good move is rook a to c8. And here I can't go for this plan. It doesn't work anymore because rook takes and defends the knight. And I don't win this pawn on g7. So that would have been good if he just took a moment here to consider. But he just instinctively captured the pawn. And so I went bishop b2. He moved. I took on g7. He moved, and now you can see I'm up 5 pawns to 3. But if you remember, when I was talking the last game, the one just before this, I said that the endgame tactics are crazy, and you're going to see why. You would think this is a very simple game to convert, but it actually proved to be extremely difficult for me. And I think this is one of the most interesting games that I've played. Pawn g3. Rook comes down to attack c2. Pawn comes to c4, attacking the knight. I thought if knight comes here, we can just start kicking it around. If it comes here, we can come here and defend our pawn. So he moved forwards. I attack it again. He moves up again. I bring my bishop back into the action, defending the pawn. He pulls his bishop over to e5, and I thought, okay, I'm up a couple pawns. Now's a good time to trade. So capture, capture, defend the pawn, king moves up, capture, 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 and my rook comes into the action. I am up 1 whole pawn, not the greatest conversion, but I'm up a pawn, and this becomes very difficult. King moves, I move in, he moves again, and here I should have played the move rook a5. Because I can defend my pawn on a2. He's going to have to come back. I could even move up to a6. And if he attacks me, then I could come over here and try to go after one of these pawns to one of these squares. And then he'd have to come back down and come back in again. And it would take him longer. I should have just done that. I mean, it just gives me a bunch of free tempos or extra moves. I don't. I capture the pawn. He captures the pawn. I play rook f7, and the position is completely drawn. I have 3 pawns and he's got 2. Doesn't look drawn, does it? I mean, you would think I'm just completely winning, but it is drawn, and I don't play this correctly. He plays the move a5. Now I am completely winning again. And I thought I was winning the entire time. I capture the pawn. I'm completely losing again. Now you are not losing. It's drawn. You're probably wondering, like, why is this drawn? And it's very interesting to see why. 3 pawns against 1. I mean, it's got to be winning for white, right? Like, it's got to be winning. But it's not. And I'll show you why. Here, my opponent has several moves that are good for him. He has the move king b3, getting his king out of the way so that his pawn can promote. He has the move king b2, getting out of the way so that the pawn can promote. And he has the move a4. He played the move a4. The position's still completely drawn. I think I sat in this position for about 15 minutes because I was just really unsure on how to proceed. And I saw the tactic that black had, and it was very tricky here for me. I played the move rook b7, and you can start to see this tactic unfolding now. My opponent played a3. What's the tactic, you're all wondering? Well, you can see my rook is blocking the king off, so I'm not worried about the king ever getting out of the way for the pawn to promote. The pawn is not able to promote. And if the pawn's not able to promote, then he can just move his rook around forever. And I'm going to just be able to promote all my pawns and get 3 queens and a rook and checkmate him super easily. However, this is the situation of the invincible rook. You might have heard of it before. And I had seen, probably it was a Gotham chess video back in the day, maybe a couple of years ago, about the invincible rook playing 25 brilliant moves in a row. The invincible rook is where it happens in this kind of position where I am not allowed to kill the enemy rook. The enemy rook cannot be killed because if it is, then the king's going to be stuck on a1, the pawn's on a2, and I'm blocking off the retreat squares. So it will be a stalemate because black won't be in danger, but he won't have any moves. So this is why this tactic is working, and hopefully that makes a wee bit of sense to you. Here I played the move pawn to h4. My opponent moved the king to a1. I played h5, and here my opponent needs to play the move a2, trapping his king in, not having any retreat squares, and then he can start to move his invincible rook that can never be taken. I'll just show you the sequence now. If he had played a2, I'm just going to go through probably the most logical moves for white. You always want to keep your pawns together. So maybe here I would have gone g4. They're all basically the exact same moves, even if the engine says it's inaccurate. Rook comes to a4. I go f3. Rook takes g4. I can't capture the rook because it's stalemate. So here I would have to move my king. He checks me again. I move my king. He checks me again. And I can never capture the rook because the king is gonna, you know, be stalemated, to be stuck here in the corner. It's just no fun. So this is what I was really afraid of. Here, in this position, if it had gotten to a position like this, if I move my king to any square, well, I can't go there, but any other square, then black wins the game because he can take my rook, he can move over, he can promote this to a queen, and he gets a checkmate. So here I would have to play the move king takes h7, and the game is drawn. That would have been truly, truly depressing if that had happened. Thankfully it didn't, and I'll show you what went on to happen in the actual game. In the game, my opponent should have played pawn to a2, but he played the move rook to a6. And here I'm able to just defend my pawn. He moves his rook over to h6. I move my king up. He goes pawn a2. And thankfully, in this position, I was able to move my rook to the a file, not trapping his king in. And if I did something else, something stupid, like let's say I did this move, then my opponent can start doing his super rook thing, and I'm going to lose the game. But I find the move rook to a7, getting ready to trade this off, and I find it because I knew the invincible rook idea, and I was thankful that I was able to play this move. Here, my opponent played rook to b6. I start moving my king up. He moves over. I move my pawns up. He promotes. I take. He takes. But now I have 3 connected pawns with a king, and his king's in the opposite corner. So I knew that I was able to get a queen here. So I just start pushing them up the board. Thankfully, I was able to get a couple queens. And here I was able to, I don't know why that's going really slow, but I was able to get the very slow checkmate on h4. That game was nuts. I shouldn't have allowed that draw to ever happen, and the way I could have avoided it was just delaying the king by coming onto, was it a5, I believe, like I said in the analysis, and just defending my pawn on a2. If I had just defended my pawn on a2, then he never has a passer that can get passed. I could have just kept the game very simple, but I caused a lot of stress for myself, and I used a lot of time in the endgame studying that. It was, though, a very, very fun game. My opponent played with a rating of 71.8, and I played with a rating of 79.1. I really enjoyed this game, but the third game of this tournament was honestly the most fun, and I think you're all going to love it. Like, it was so enjoyable. So let's jump into that game right now. All right, lads, game 3. I'm going to try to go through this quicker because I know this video is going on long, but we got to play our report Dutch. D4, F5, Knight F3, Knight F6. And I really like the way that this transposed because he just immediately makes his moves very obvious. If you delay the knight coming to f3 and you play the pawn forwards first and fianchetto, and then maybe the knight comes to h3, you can get into some trickier lines. But the way he developed was very readable, and these first few moves all happened at the speed of light. This is the rapport Dutch, putting the knight on e4. He attacks, and whenever the knight attacks your knight on e4, you have to immediately play the move c6. This is what I played. c6 defends d5. I'm already defending d5, but it was attacked twice. I'm also defending with the queen, but you just need to make sure d5 is not going anywhere. So if capture here, we can recapture, and our bishop can come here and defend the whole pawn chain. Everything's good. Here he jumps his knight into the center. If they ever do this in the rapport Dutch, you have to immediately try to challenge that knight. So I played the move knight d7, attacking the knight on e5. Here he brought his bishop to f4, one of the top moves that I looked at in my Ginger GM course on this opening. Here I knew that I could play the move g5 and attack this bishop. Now, Ginger GM says in his course that there are a couple different ways of playing this, and the more aggressive and exciting way is g5. And so this is what I went for. Here, my opponent came up with a tricky sort of sideline, and the move is e3. And if a lower player was facing against white, I think they probably would have just captured the bishop, and this is clearly wrong because this is a forced checkmate in 2 moves. Queen h5, king has to come here, queen f7, checkmate. So I knew that I couldn't capture the bishop, but here we have a couple very interesting moves. Now I had remembered this move from Ginger GM, that you can castle the king in this position. And this is actually the best move. But I didn't go for this move. I went for a slightly different one, the second best move by the engine. And that move was h5. It is the second best move. Here, he can't come to h5 anymore because the rook is now seeing h5. Before, there was a pawn on h7, and so the rook was not looking at h5. So this keeps the bishop trapped. And here, he really needs to trade off some pieces. So maybe make some room for his bishop. So the way he can do that is he can capture on d7. And so if he captures on d7, if I had castled, then his knight would be attacking my rook. And so I don't actually have to capture this knight back. And instead I can capture back on f4 because he's not hitting my rook. And so here, now he has to defend his knight. So he moves it back. And now I can capture on g3, hitting the fortress, opening the king up. The rook's active. The bishop and the queen, I said it the wrong order, are going to get active. I'm going to castle. The other rook's going to come over here. We're going to go for checkmate. And that's what we do in this game. We go for checkmate, although it gets a bit chaotic. And I think you'll really like this. He captured with the h pawn, which is not a good move. In this position, he really needs to capture with the f pawn because it makes his rook more active. And it's going to be a little trickier for me to attack with h4 if he's got these two pawns here instead of these two in this formation. So here he captured h takes g3, and so I play h4. I keep pushing. Here he captured again, and I was very surprised to see this move. As soon as he said it, I said, oh, that's wrong. That's wrong. Like I was like thinking, like I don't think I verbalized it. Maybe I did slightly, because you're not really supposed to talk in a chess game, but I definitely shook my head because I knew that was a wrong move. I capture the pawn. Now my rook is super active on the h file. He moves his knight back for defense. I find the best move, queen f6. Bringing my queen over to h6. If I can just get rid of my bishop, I'm coming in here somehow and checkmating in some sort of fashion. I'm not sure, but that's what I want to do. He tries to get a wee bit of counterplay, and so he takes my pawn on d5. But here I can simply recapture e takes d5, and I'm not worried. He still tries to get some counterplay. He puts his queen on a4, pinning this pawn, and now the knight is threatening to take on d5. I can't recapture because the queen is looking at my king. I just moved my bishop to e6. Now, he said after the game when I spoke to him, why didn't you go bishop d7? I just didn't think it was as active. I probably could have gone d7, castled, and then snaked the bishop around, but I thought this snakes just as well. Both moves are basically equal according to the engine. Here, instead of doing this whole pin thing, he just decides, I need some more pieces by my king. I need to defend him, so I'm going to go back. And here I played the top engine move. And you might all be a wee bit shocked for what this move is. But I did it, and then I regretted it, because there's probably a whole bunch of other moves that just keep things simple and my attack very straightforward without making things very sharp. But I allowed this game to get very sharp, and I shouldn't have. I played the move castles, and he immediately took the pawn on a7. This just looks a wee bit dangerous for my king, doesn't it? It's like queen comes here, king up, queen up here. You know, what's going on? But I didn't care. Rook d to g8. I am going for an attack here. If I can get my queen onto one of these squares, and then I'm coming in checkmate because this bishop is pinned, I'm feeling good. I'm going for it. He checks me. I run. He checks me. And here I make the stupidest move ever. What move would you not play in this position? That's a really dumb question. What move would you not play? Well, you wouldn't play king to d7 because it allows one of his pieces to attack my king and join the fight. And I honestly, I'm being completely honest, I did not see that this was a check until he played it. I just didn't see it. I don't know what was going on in my mind. But the move I have to find here is just king b8. I mean, this move is just fine. Like, what can he do? He can't do anything if my king's on b8. The queen can't check here. The queen can't check here. You know, can't check here. Definitely can't check here. I'm doing totally fine. And I can continue with my attack. Here, I'm just going to sack some rooks and pieces and just absolutely checkmate him. But I didn't. I played king to d7. He checks me. I run away. And here I spent a whole bunch of time thinking. I was like, do I play king d6? And this is the top move by the engine. But I was really worried about queen b4 or a3. I wasn't entirely sure, but queen b4 was one I calculated. And then I thought, I'm going to have to block. And then he can either take or he can throw in a check here. And if he throws the check in here and I start running, he can check here. I start running. I believe it's a forced mate. Or no, I'm sorry. I believe it's a forced draw. I'm not entirely sure how. Well, let's have a look at it. Queen b6, king e7, queen b7, king e8, queen b8, king e7, queen b7. If I go king f8, then queen b8, and if I come to g7, which I probably would have tried, he has queen a7, and I would have tried to hide on h6, and then he has knight f4. Okay, and now I don't have any way to win this game, even though it looks really good for me. Like sack here doesn't work. Yeah, just nothing works. So my best move apparently is a rook g7. He goes b6 and hg8, just doubling up here. I mean, this looks so good for me, does it not? And then knight f3. I don't know why this is brilliant. What's hanging? Oh yeah, this piece is hanging. Okay, cool. Knight f3, back here, and position's still equal. Bishop g5, apparently. Yeah, I don't know. Very tricky game. Now I take, and he's completely winning. That would not be fun. So here after take, we would have to do bishop takes here and defend with the queen. The only move. So it could have gotten very ugly. In this position, my opponent checked, and instead of moving up, I decided I'm immediately going to move down. So I came down, king to e8. He checked me. I moved up. He took the pawn. I moved over to f8, and he moved the wrong knight in. I actually have a forced mate here in 10. And I found like the first 6 moves of it, and I couldn't find the rest. And so I gave up on it. And I'm kind of bummed. But this is what I was calculating. Check. His king can't move away, so he has to capture. So this is very easy to calculate. And then check. And I knew that he couldn't capture here, so he's forced to go here. And then check. And then the king goes here. And I didn't see this move. And it's a very easy move to see in this position, but when it's all in your mind, you can't just visualize all that. So it was a wee bit tricky for me to visualize this. So I'll just show you the continuation. Check. King's best move is h2. This is a slightly quicker mate. Here, rook h8. The king can't move. The bishop can't move because it's pinned. And so he has to just block with his other pieces. So here he could block with the queen, take. Here he could block with a knight. But then here we just capture, and finally in this position, the queen and the knight work together to get the checkmate. So it was a forced mate in 10. And I nearly found it. I did nearly find it, but I didn't find it. So I didn't go for this move. Instead of going for the forced checkmate, I played the move queen h6, which misses the mate and gives my opponent a winning position, which was pretty disgusting. He didn't find it. He found queen b8. I moved my king. He checked again. I moved my king again. And in this position, he needs to find knight eg6. This knight has to come here. If the other knight comes here, it doesn't work. So I'll just show you knight eg6, and then I take, and then queen e5. Checking here. So the reason you take with this knight is so you vacate this square. And so now there's only 3 squares, but here I would go king f7. According to the engine, this is the best. And knight takes here on g6. And in this position, my rook's in danger. If I take the knight with the queen, he wins my rook. And so I would have to play rook g8. And now his knight can just take h4. And I take h4. But you can see he's up 4 points of material. And he's very easily able to defend. He can even move the pawn. And when I move the knight away, he can get the king out and running away to vacation in Spain. I hate when other people are able to go on vacation and I'm stuck at home. So I was very thankful that my opponent did not find the move knight e to g6 and instead played the move knight to f3. And I looked at the board, I looked at my score sheet, and I wrote down the next sequence of moves and then played them out. Bishop takes, rook takes, checkmate. And he was very surprised to see the checkmate because he didn't realize at first that his bishop was pinned. But I was very happy to get this win. This was a fun one. A bit wild, and I should have played it a lot cleaner than I did. But I didn't find that move king to b8. If I could just have moved to b8, this game would have been simple, would have been able to win. Probably have a 99% accuracy or something crazy. But the engine gave us an accuracy of 79.7. Our opponent with an accuracy of 70.5. I really enjoyed this game. Let's jump into the last game, game 4, which I'm going to speed run in like 2 minutes. Here we go. One of the problems with being a world famous chess YouTuber is that people study against you. And not only do they study against you, this is one of the kids from my church, Dexter, who I even picked up and gave a ride to this chess tournament. You know, like, can't believe I gave this guy a ride to my chess tournament and then he proceeds to absolutely demolish me in the opening. But he did study against me. He knew what to play. And it was a sideline that I just wasn't super familiar with, and I didn't play it correctly. Pawn d4, pawn d5, knight c3, knight f6, bishop f4, a6, e3, and here he played the move c5, which is one in my course, and I know that generally when they play the pawn to c5, you should take and then try to hold on to your pawn. But the way I went about it wasn't completely accurate. And I'll just show you guys this super quick. There's not much to this game. I took the pawn. He attacked it with his bishop by moving e6. And so here I need to defend. Now, the move in this position that you need to remember is not the move that I played. I played the move b4, defending with the pawn, which is a line in a lot of the other variations. But the move you need to remember to play here is not as intuitive because it goes against that adage, a knight on the rim is dim. Knight a4 is the correct move, defending the pawn. And after queen a5 check, attacking this piece twice, I can defend my knight with my queen. And here he can just capture, capture, capture. Here I have the bishop pair. And I probably should have just gone for this. I mean, in my course, it says this is the position you get, and you have the bishop pair, and you can develop, you can castle kingside generally here, and you're doing pretty well with the bishop pair. It's a more positional game. But I didn't do this. I defended with the b4 pawn. And so this was the mistake. My opponent attacked with b6. He knew this. He was prepped. I went knight a4 now because I knew that this was an idea in a lot of lines, but I just played the moves in the opposite order. He took the pawn. I took with knight. He took with bishop. I took with pawn. He checked. I defended, and he took the pawn. And in this position, it's a wee bit different. I don't have the pawn on the b file, and my opponent doesn't either. So you'd think it's pretty similar, but it's actually quite different. Before I would have been able to just like have a very solid structure. And now I have an isolated pawn. I have an isolated pawn. And although I have the bishop pair, which is good, it's just much more tricky. And here I just start to blunder like a madman. Knight to f3. Foolish, Owen. You're so foolish. Knight to c6. Bishop to e2, you idiot, Owen, you idiot. Now, I was afraid of going bishop d3, which was the top engine move. And the reason I was afraid of this was because I saw he had knight b4. And I didn't want my bishop to be tempoed. And I didn't want to lose this beautiful bishop where I was going to be setting up Greek gifts. So that's why I didn't go for that. So I went to e2. He castled. I went a bishop g5. And he jumps in and tempos my queen. My queen's got to move. Where would you move the queen? Oh, this piece is in danger. It's defended. I'm okay. So I just thought I'll just move the queen and try to stay as active as possible. So I put it on d3, trying to stay active. He tempos with his other piece, which I knew was a possibility. I retreat to b3. And here he takes the pawn on c2, forking both my pieces. I move my king. He takes. And now I'm just a wee bit depressed. And I moved pretty quick. The game was over in like 10 minutes. I play back to b1. He retreats to c2. He's defended by his queen. I try to get my bishop a wee bit more active finally. I should have just played it here originally. He takes my bishop. I take his knight. He attacks with h6. I play the top engine move. h4. If he were to be stupid here and take, then my rook is active. Whoop-de-doo. But like, let's say he does something like this. Then I have bishop h7, king h8, bishop takes c2 with check, king g8, bishop h7. Isn't this beautiful? Now the queen is involved. King h8. This is called a windmill tactic. Bishop g8. And the king only has one square. Nothing can block. And nothing can get in the way. Over here. And queen h7 mate would have been beautiful. I was looking for it. I saw it kind of. But my opponent didn't allow me to play it. Here he did not take my knight. He just moved his knight back. I go in for this stupid move. I go g4. He checks and takes my pawn. I run away. And he plays the beautiful move a5, setting up a bishop checkmate. I went for g8, like hoping, hey, maybe I'll get one chance to maybe get a mate here. He can't take me because this is mate. But I knew he had constant checks and was going to win. Check. I don't even bother blocking with the queen. He checkmates me on e2. Pretty ugly game by me. My opponent, Dexter, played with an 88.4% accuracy, and I played with a 69.7%. But that's what happens. You get studied on because you're a famous chess YouTuber, and then you get taken advantage of because little kids need a ride home. I threatened one of the brothers of Dexter with saying I was gonna leave him at ASU and I wasn't gonna take him home. He could walk home. That's what I said because I was pretty salty. But I didn't do that. I took them all home and I humbly, not humbly, that's the wrong word. I was defeated. I hope you guys enjoyed this recap of my tournament. My rating after this tournament went down 11 points. So I am now a 1482. And I will see you all very soon. Bye for now.